Good morning, and welcome to the National Nonpartisan Conversation on Voter Rights in Houston, Texas. We ask that you please silence your phones and electronic devices. At this time, please welcome to the stage the Kinder High School for Performing and Visual Arts Chorale, performing a patriotic medley, including America the Beautiful, My Country 'Tis of Thee, and Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Say, can you see?
the Kinder High School for Performing and Visual Arts Chorale. Thank you. Please stand for the presentation of the colors by the joint forces of the Houston Police and Fire Departments, to be followed by the national anthem performed by Kiora Michelle and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Welcome Reverend Alexander E.M. Johnson, Executive Pastor of Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church.
Shall we pray? Oh God, we thank you on this day for the opportunity that is ours to gather, to ensure that we might engage in conversation, so that this might be a more perfect union. We thank you for each of these who has joined on this day. Thank you for the cities that are represented. We thank you most especially for our host, Mayor Sylvester Turner. We pray now, oh God, that you would have your way to ensure that productive and profitable conversations take place, so that we might materialize more access to the ballot. We pray, oh God, that where there is injustice, you would eradicate it. We ask, oh God, that you would help the moral universe continue to bend towards justice. We ask now, oh God, that these conversations are engaged with pure hearts, oh God. And we ask now, oh God, that you would allow for all people's voices to be heard as a consequence thereof. Have your way is our prayer, that this might be a union wherein you might be pleased. We pray this prayer, O God, with great expectation. In the name of all that is holy. Amen.
Please turn your attention to the video screen for a message.
constitutional issue here. The command of the Constitution is plain. There is no moral issue. It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country. There is no issue of states' rights or national rights. There is only the struggle for human rights. I have not the slightest doubt what will be your answer. But the last time a president sent a civil rights bill to the Congress, it contained a provision to protect voting rights in federal elections. That civil rights bill was passed after 8 long months of debate. And when that bill came to my desk from the Congress for my signature, the heart of the voting provision had been eliminated. This time, on this issue, there must be no delay or no hesitation or no compromise with our purpose. We cannot, we must not refuse to protect the right of every American to vote in every election. So I ask you to join me in working long hours, nights, and weekends if necessary to pass this bill. And I don't make that request lightly. Far from the window where I sit with the problems of our country, I recognize that from outside this chamber is the outraged conscience of a nation, the grave concern of many nations, and the harsh judgment of history on our acts. But even if we pass this bill, the battle will not be over.
When I was growing up, I saw the need for change. I didn't like what I saw, and I wanted to do something about it. I grew up with an older brother who's disabled, and I saw people around me being put down, being discriminated against because of their disability. And I kept asking questions, why this, why that? And my mother and father and grandparents, great-grandparents who said, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. On Sunday, March 7, 1965, about 600 of us attempted to walk or march from Selma to Montgomery to dramatize to the nation and to the world that people wanted to register to vote, to become participants in the democratic process. We were beaten. We were trampled by horses. We were tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper. Had a concussion at the bridge. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. But somehow, in some way, people responded to the fact that these American citizens were so determined. That the President of the United States responded, the Congress responded, and President Lyndon Johnson introduced the Voting Rights Act. Congress debated it, it passed, and was signed into law on August 6, 1965. Only thing I did, I gave a little blood on that bridge. But others throughout the South gave their very lives. I happen to believe that the right to vote is precious. It's almost sacred in a democratic society such as ours. It is the most powerful, nonviolent instrumental tool that we have. And everybody, every single person who's a citizen, who's of age, should be able to cast that vote. It should be as simple, as easy as getting a glass of water.
I strongly support, and I believe that Congress should enact a bipartisan reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act. We have done that. Congress has done that 5 times since 1965, typically by an overwhelming margin here in the Senate. It's been about 15 years now since our last amendment to the Voting Rights Act, and I think it's fair to say that 15 years passage, it's probably timely and necessary to look at updates. And in order to do that, I think, Madam President, that what we have to do is we've got to step back from the partisanship. We've got to step back from the politicization that is driving this conversation. I think we should be able to agree to meaningful improvements that will help ensure that all our elections are free, they're fair, and they're accessible to all Americans.
Every generation needs a new revolution. There's a difference between a moment and a movement. Revolution isn't frozen in time. It's a thawing river that starts as a stream and grows to a roar. It is the fulfillment of a dream dreamt by people who see the summit after yet another peak that turns into a false promise. 1 in 3 eligible voters this election will be under 35 years old. Welcome to a movement in history, a newborn page, created by unity, and the hands, voices that write and speak it into existence. We were born into a society that defines safety as a complacent whisper, but now nobody has more at stake than we do. Looking up to those who came before us, inheriting all their impossibles, all their what-ifs, and marching forth with why not. They say sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul. This is why we vote.
We've got a good foundation to help provide access to the ballot that is equal, again, for all Americans and free from any form of discrimination.
I happen to believe that the right to vote is precious. It's almost sacred in a democratic society such as ours. It is the most powerful, nonviolent instrumental tool that we have.
Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your breakfast. From our sponsor.
When we start out in this world, the possibilities are as endless as the night sky. Nothing is impossible. Over time, you might question, you might doubt. But at Jacobs, we always see the world as it can be. We're the curious, the brave, the optimistic, and the grounded. We keep planting the seeds of potential. We're bold enough to explore. We make connections that make the difference. We change the trajectory of how we all live, today and into tomorrow.
We seek perspectives, combining the knowledge of those before us with what we know now. And together, we're able to transform the future. We're a global team empowered to question, discover, and try. To us, everything is achievable. We collaborate, designing solutions that make life smarter, more seamless, and more sustainable for everyone.
We anticipate, calculate, and evaluate, and then act with agility and precision. We look for insights and ideas, pushing the limits of what's possible to create the standard for what's to come.
Whether it's applying our discoveries to drive the world ahead,
ensuring the resiliency of our planet and its people,
or acting with agility to design and protect the smart places of tomorrow.
we're united in our drive to dream big. And as the world's thinkers, visionaries, and doers, we're always pushing beyond.
Join me in welcoming to the stage Ron Williams, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Building and Infrastructure of the Americas, Jacobs.
Good morning. Welcome and thank you for having the opportunity to say a few words before our session today. I'm Ron Williams, Senior Vice President and America's General Manager for Jacobs, a global professional services firm. I'd like to tell you who we are and why we're here this week. As you saw in our video, we deliver a wide range of solutions from thriving cities to scientific discovery and advanced manufacturing, all part of our purpose to create a more connected and sustainable world. We live and work across the United States and in more than 40 countries. Right here in Houston, we've worked with and are working with Metro, NASA's Johnson Space Center, Houston First Corporation, and TxDOT. We're also proud to be expanding the city's Northeast Water Purification Plant, one of the largest projects of its kind in the U.S., bolstering water resources for this rapidly growing metro area. This is a transformational period in our country. We're seeing once-in-a-generation investments in infrastructure in the transportation, water, energy, and power sectors. We're hearing from clients a greater than ever emphasis on sustainability, equity, inclusion, and social value in all these areas. Recently, we helped clients win more than $364 million in Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act grant awards for projects that make our cities and communities more connected and equitable. Projects like a new bike pedestrian path reconnecting a historic urban community to the city around it, and multiple grants for electric buses that improve connectivity and air quality in underserved neighborhoods. We're using the power of data to help clients assess these social impacts, make smarter, more equitable investments in their communities. Most of us here have been or currently involved in such projects in the communities you represent. It has been a much needed paradigm shift in our industry. As a company, Jacobs has been on our own transformational journey. We have strived to create a workplace where our differences are accepted and celebrated. We believe a diversity of thought leads to better, bolder, more innovative solutions for our clients and for our teams. One of our core values is we live inclusion. Inclusion is also about making sure that our leaders are transparent and acceptable, acting on our commitments and initiatives to create meaningful and measurable change in the company and in the communities where we live and serve. Inclusion is why we're here today. After all, that's what the right to vote is about. It's about having a say in the direction of our communities, our country, and our lives. The vote is our voice in the democratic process, and it's about making sure we continuously include our fellow citizens in that process. This is a hard-fought right. Men and women throughout history have had to work hard to ensure this right sees no race, disability, religion, and sexual orientation. That work is a constant cause for celebration. And yet, history continues, even today. There are attempts to make it more difficult to vote, to exclude some Americans, particularly people of color, the elderly, and people with disabilities from easily exercising their right. The right to vote still needs our protection. That leads us to the theme of this opening session: where do we go from here? For Jacobs, we know that this is an opportunity to live our values by speaking out against efforts to deprive Americans of their right. We encourage our people to exercise their right to vote and stand against efforts that prevent anyone from doing the same. We're committed to achieving real change, creating a tomorrow we can all be proud of, not just for our clients, but for the communities where we live and work. We're proud to be part of this conversation today, to live inclusion, and to protect, defend, and to promote the right to vote. Thank you. So next, I have the pleasure of introducing Mayor Turner. Elected in December 2015 and re-elected in December 2019, Sylvester Turner is in his second four-year term as Houston's mayor. Since taking office, Mayor Turner has passed 6 balanced budgets. I think that's worth repeating. I have to say that again. 6 balanced budgets. And guided the city through multiple federally declared disasters in the past 5 years, most notably Hurricane Harvey and Winter Storm Uri. He led historic pension reform, expanded municipal investments in renewable energy, and managed the winning bid to host the World Petroleum Congress. On the national level, Mayor Turner is currently chair of Climate Mayors, a bipartisan network of more than 470 U.S. mayors demonstrating client leadership. Before becoming mayor, Sylvester Turner served for 27 years in the Texas State Legislature.
Thank you so very, very much. And let me thank Jacobs for their sponsorship. Please give it up to Jacobs one more time. Look, let me say good morning to everybody. Good morning. Oh, come on. Good morning. All right, all right. It's already been an exciting kickoff, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being at the reception last night, for getting up, being here this morning. I want to thank those kids from Kinder High School of Professions. Please give it up to them. The person who sang our national anthem, the honor guard, Reverend Johnson from Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. In fact, Mayor Victoria Woodard went to Wheeler Sunday and just had a shouting good time. And so let me thank everyone for being here today. Look, let me thank you for being here for the second National Nonpartisan Conference on Voter Rights. You've already seen the film that really kind of lays things out. And so we're looking forward to a very exciting day today. I do want to, in the spirit of bipartisanship, nonpartisanship, I do want to thank the other co-hosts of this conference. Let me start off by thanking Mayor Michael Hancock of Denver for starting it. It's his dream child, and I really appreciate him. I want to thank Mayor Giles from Mesa, Arizona. Thank you. And he was with one of my close friends, Bishop, last night eating. Mayor Hancock, that's why we couldn't find him, because he was out and about in the city with Bishop Dixon last night. So thank you so very much. I want to thank Mayor Holt, who will be here right around noontime from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Mayor Regina Romero from Tucson, Arizona. I want to thank that person. And then Mayor Aquanetta Warren of Fontana, California. I don't know if she was with us at dinner. Mayor Warren, are you here? I think she'll be here shortly, but she was out at dinner, and of course I left them, and they were singing and dancing around the dinner table last night. So this is a bipartisan group of mayors who are co-hosting this event. 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. Give it up to the group, okay? And I want to thank all of the elected officials and other mayors from across the country, elected officials from the city of Houston. I have some of my council members who are here. If you're a council member for the city of Houston, just stand up. The Vice Mayor Pro Tem is here. Council Member Robert Gallegos is here. Give it up to those council members. And I do want to acknowledge our County Attorney, Christian Menifee. Stand up, a young brother. Thank you all for being here. We can't do this without the sponsors. So they're critical. So I do want to acknowledge again all of our sponsors. The title sponsor is Houston Endowment. The presenting sponsors are Jacobs Engineering, HNTB, Houston First Corporation. Quite frankly, that's where we are today. They manage many of the city's properties. So I certainly want to thank Houston First, Hill Day, Argentina James. Thank you, Argentina. Really appreciate that. Comcast, AT&T, Centerpoint Energy, Center for Tech and Civic Life, Houston Airport Systems, HEB, Hensel Phelps, Camden Living, Raytech Construction Resources, Texas Southern University Foundation, and the University of Houston, my alma mater. There was no way that we're going to come here without them being a sponsor. So I want to thank them. And I want to thank the sponsoring organization with us. These are mayors, but at the same time, the National League of Cities they sponsored the initial one. They're sponsoring us here, and the CEO of the National League of Cities is also here. And then please give it up to Clarence Anthony. Clarence, thank you. And then lastly, let me just simply say that in this conversation dealing with voting, the right to register to vote should be nonpartisan. Okay, everybody should be that's eligible should be allowed to register to vote. The right to vote, whoever you choose to vote for, that should be nonpartisan. Okay, you can vote when you get into that booth for whoever you want to vote for, but everyone in this country should have the right to vote. And then how those votes are tabulated and counted in the end, that should be nonpartisan. Everybody should want a fair election. That's just a given. How we have come to politicize all 3 of those, quite frankly, makes no sense. And what's interesting, it was Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Texan, who instructed Congress in 1965 to get the first bill passed, the Voting Rights Act, in 1965. Ironically, it was another Texan, George Bush, who was the last one to reauthorize it. One started it, a Democrat. One reauthorized it, a Republican. And then, of course, on the film that you saw, Congressman John Lewis speaking forcefully for the reauthorization, and then Senator Lisa Murkowski speaking forcefully for its reauthorization. One was a Democrat, one was a Republican. And in that same thing, in that same flavor, today we assemble in Houston 3 Democratic mayors, 3 Republican mayors, with other mayors coming from all over the country. That is the flavor, that's the spirit that we need to rekindle, fertilize, nurture as best as we can. And the best way to do that is to have this national, nonpartisan conversation. And we have to be very intentional about it. So that's why you've been called here. That's why you assemble here. That's why the support is so much needed. And so enjoy the day. Bring your energy, bring your ideas, bring your thoughts, and then let's have a very fruitful and productive conversation. Welcome to the city of Houston.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mayor Michael Hancock of Denver, Colorado, and Mr. Clarence Anthony, Executive Director of the National League of Cities.
Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing, Mayor?
I'm good. Good morning, everyone. Thank y'all for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause. And if you'll keep it going, we never get a chance to, at least when you get up to thank everyone, you don't thank yourself. But we should give much love and appreciation for the courage and leadership of your mayor here in Houston, Sylvester Turner. Thank you, Mayor Turner.
No, Mayor Hancock, this is a great morning to be able to have this conversation with you. And you and I, you guys may find that we are really good friends, so we may get off what we're supposed to talk about. May have to start talking about what type of razor he uses to shave his head, what level of the lather on his head do we. No, but we really are friends. And when I think about this journey, and I think about us being here this morning, I think about what is the theme, where do we go from here? And I remember you and I having this conversation about the need for education, the need for access, and then the need for action. Right. And so today we're here on the second convening. I want to ask you to walk us through, how did you come up with this idea? Why was it so important that we have this conversation?
I was sitting at home in Colorado, and thanks to so many people, Colorado today is considered the gold standard in terms of access to voting. One of those people who made that happen, you're going to hear from her, is Amber McReynolds, who was here, who was our election official in Denver, and really pushed for technology, but the whole goal was to improve or expand access to the ballot box. And I'm watching what's happening around the country. As of today, some 500 pieces of legislation being proposed to suppress access to voting in America. 34 states have passed suppressive laws, suppressive voting rights laws in this nation. And as a beneficiary of those who marched, were threatened, were beaten, oftentimes killed, for the right to vote, to give me that right to vote, to give you that right to vote. I simply couldn't sit still. I was suffocated by a desire that no one was countering those actions. We were seeing elected officials in Congress stand up and say, this is not right, but no one was actually pulling the nation together, and quite frankly, there should have been major protests around this nation for what we were watching happening around the country. And so that's why we're here. We wanted to convene particularly local and county officials to have a conversation about what we needed to do. We've done that. We did it in Denver. We're going to do it here. And so after Mayor Turner's summit here, hopefully we change this to the national nonpartisan movement to protect voter rights in America.
No, I think that's very important, and it is often said that if you see a problem and you want it resolved, go to a local government official, and we will solve it. You know, it is a challenging time. At the National League of Cities, we represent 2,700 cities, and we think about our mission is to look at the issues that are city leaders are facing, and then tackle those issues. And I think that this is one of the things that we are proud of, that we are in fact not sitting on the sidelines, but in fact getting involved. So you've talked about the why. We came up with a playbook because one of the things that we wanted to do when having these type of conversations is not just have a conversation, but give you something that you can go home or here in Houston, go to your church, your neighborhood leaders, and say, here's what we can do as a community, as a leader. So when you think back on the playbook and what we did from Denver's conversation, what did you get out of that playbook that you feel we could talk a little bit about this morning?
Well, I think the first thing is we recognize that nothing frustrates those who want to take something from you than for you to navigate the new process or strategy that they laid out for you. So if you want to suppress my right to vote, then we need to make sure we have the tools to use whatever they put in front of us to make sure we vote even more. And that is what I hope that I took away from the playbook. We are giving mayors, Mayor Turner, Mayor Giles, the tools and the strategies, some ideas on how to navigate the new game. Because when those who look up, who help propose these pieces of legislation around the country, we want them to say, well, they voted more now than they did before we put these roadblocks in place. Because here's the reality. At the local level, we administer the elections. States oversee them, but it's the mayor, city council, and the county officials who administer the elections. The fact that Houston now went from 24 drop-off locations to just one, and a city as large as it is, they're not going to call their member of Congress. That elderly woman who can't find her voting box or her voting location is not going to call the member of Congress. They're going to call Mayor Turner. They're going to call the city council person.
Yep.
And so we have got to make sure that Mayor Turner, city council, county election officials have the tools to help navigate what has been brought to them. And I think it's some opportunity. You guys have been great, and I think it's going to work.
Well, one of the things that the delegates that attended the first session figured out is one size did not fit all. Whatever worked in Mesa didn't work in Denver. Whatever worked in Jackson, Mississippi really didn't work in Pittsburgh or Port Arthur. I mean, so there was this recognition in the playbook that we had to give some flexibility for every city leader to design an initiative within your community that fits your community. So a couple of things, and I hope that all of you will download this playbook, so that you can go back. But the first thing is democracies thrive when cities vote. Cities vote. And it was about engagement. So the first thing we talked about is trying to make sure that every citizen felt like they could get engaged in voting, that the articles that they were seeing in the news on video was not accurate, because they was accurate about the challenges, but they had to feel like they wanted to engage. And then the voter education piece is essential. You know, Secretary Page talked about that a little bit last night. Let's know what is on the ballot. And, you know, I'm from the country of the state of Florida. And you should see you should see some of the constitutional amendments and how they're written. You really would not know that that was supporting education. And so we got to really figure out how we get that education piece. But Mayor, I think the biggest thing that is in this playbook is about access and the perception that access is not available. When I say to you that we only have one voting drop-off site in Houston, what kind of reaction do you have to that?
I think about people who are limited with mobility options. I think about the older adults who don't have the ability to get across town. I think about people with disabilities who are just lost their access to the ballot box. I think about people who are low income or no income, being basically told you don't matter. Texas was in Houston, and I talked to Mayor Turner. He's the one who brought this to my attention, this conversation about one ballot box, one ballot drop-off location. There should have been an uprising in Texas, in Houston, because you just disenfranchised a large percentage of your voters in Houston, Texas. And there's nothing worse than feeling like being told you don't matter. Yeah. Or we're gonna do everything we can to keep you from accessing the ballot box. And by the way, I was talking to an elected official in Texas when we started this conversation about doing this in Denver, and he said to me, listen, if I want to vote in Texas, I can vote. And I think we get confused. John Lewis didn't get out of his house at 17 just for John Lewis. He thought about children he was never going to meet. Martin Luther King didn't give up his life for just his children. He gave up his life for me, who wasn't even born yet. The reality is we owe it to the next generation to pick up that baton and to say what you're doing now not only threatens me, but it threatens future generations. And I have the rights today because someone thought about me before I was here. Yep. Thank you. Yep. That's why we did what we did. So that's what I see happening in Houston as a tragedy and really an affront to those who bled and died for our right to vote.
So, we talked about that baton passing topic in Houston. Do you think we've dropped that baton?
Absolutely, because we were just silent. We've become too complacent. Clarence is referring to a comment that was made in Denver by Carlotta Walls Lanier, one of the famed Little Rock Nine, who attended the Denver session. And on stage, I asked her the question, based on all that you went through, all that you fought for, integrating that school, being spat on, yelled at, pushed down the stairs, made to sit on tacks and act dignified as if it didn't hurt because you didn't want to show them any weakness. What would you say after that battle and that progress that you gave us? What would you say to this generation while you're watching all that's happening, particularly with voter rights? And she didn't miss a beat. She said, you dropped the baton. And it sent chills down my spine then, it's chills down my spine now. Yeah. And if that is not a clarion call for today's movement, I've never heard one. Pick up the baton and say, I own this and I got prepared for the next generation.
One of the things we were intentional about is making sure that inclusivity was important. Yeah. Diversity of all. I mean, we focused on this nonpartisan piece a lot around the mayors and the council members and the communities. Who else did we feel or you felt was important to have in this room? And Mayor Turner was very intentional. Yeah. Every time we think we had the whole room of diverse folks, he'd bring up another group. That's right. So that's right. How was that done and why was it done?
It was important. LGBTQ, persons with disabilities, older adults, elected officials, activists, young people. They were superstars in Denver, Colorado. See some of them in the back. They are here in Houston with us as well. Cities United, thank y'all for being here. Our young people, y'all watch. They're going to light you up in the sessions. Young people.
Yeah, as my daughter taught me, that's what's up. That's what's up.
That's what's up, right. They are in the house. They were phenomenal in Denver. So we and I know Mayor Turner kept going as well. We want to make sure the room is diverse. We are trying to hit every segment of the community because voting is, again, foundational.
I think one of the goals we had was that the playbook was easy to use. It's a 20-page document, and it really gives you step by step of some of the things that you can do, no matter what role you have in a community. And that was important for the delegates that were at the first meeting. I mean, have you applied or used in Denver any of these tools? Have your staff worked with to implement some of the things?
You know, absolutely. Actually, I have taken some steps working with the faith communities with regards to voter awareness, which I think was a critical component of it. Again, making sure that we are using the latest technology. That's something that Amber talked about and really led. And now we're talking about how we improve that technology, and we continue to take advantage of the latest, greatest opportunities that are out there. How do we fund, as mayor, I'm thinking, how do we fund not less number of drop-off locations, but more drop-off locations in the city of Denver? And that's critical. A critical component is access, expand access, and we will make sure that it is still a credible process. So yeah, we have put into play and continue to put in play a lot of elements of the playbook.
When we started this process, we also made sure that corporate communities was involved. And you see the sponsors who have stepped up and said, this is important, that we engage in this issue. I know in the country of Florida, the governor has attacked corporations, and this is just not in the state of Florida. How did you convince these corporate leaders? How did you and Mayor Turner convince these corporate leaders that this is something that is nonpartisan, just community engagement, being a good corporate citizen to be able to support such an initiative?
Well, I think when raising money, the person asking for the money and their credibility is at the time more important than the cause at the time, until they have a better sense of the cause. And what Mayor Turner and I did was to put our credibility on the line and say, one, this is nonpartisan, and two, we are convening about the basic right to vote. And it may have been easier, and I don't mean that it was easy, but easier for the second session here in Houston than it was in the first session in Houston. I shared with you and Mayor Turner that some of the conversations I had with corporate leaders really broke my heart. It hurt, because I wanted them to understand the sense of urgency and how important this conversation was. And they were, quite frankly, afraid to be seen or to be associated with the right to vote. Nonpartisan right to vote. And I just could not understand that. I am grateful for those who stepped up in Denver, because we were able to put together a great summit. We raised almost $200,000 to do that. And we doubled that here in Houston because of the courage of corporations saying, you know what, you're right. Put my name on it. Jacobs and the endowment and Comcast. I'm proud of our corporate sponsors stepping up.
Yeah, I think one of the things that corporations are beginning to recognize is that employees want to see their employers step up and out on tough issues, such as voting and other topics that are in the community.
Absolutely.
But also, again, it shows being a good citizen, because they live, work, and play in those communities.
Absolutely.
Now, the partisan part again, how do we make sure that when we leave here, people really do know it was about voter access and voter rights and voter education, and this is not about politics?
Right.
What kind of advice do we give others in this room?
Stay focused and stay on the topic. It's about voting, period. And I think Mayor Turner set it up here at the podium. when the basic question of voting comes up, it's not about Democrat or Republican. It's about the fact you're a United States citizen. So stay focused on voting. We're not supporting any initiative or any candidate. It's about voting. If you take voting from our element of democracy, that's really one of the very few things that separate us from the rest of the world, or for the rest of the countries around the world who call themselves a democracy. The right to vote, the freedom to vote. You take that away, there's not much that distinguishes the United States from any of these other so-called democracies around the world. And so it is our foundational value, and anything that impedes our full exercise thereof needs to be obliterated as fast as possible.
I agree. So let's start with the end in mind. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we're packing up. We're saying goodbye. What is your vision for the end of this convening?
Well, I hope one of the things you pack is your playbook.
Yep. Oh, good.
Put the playbook in your suitcase. Matter of fact, put it in your backpack so you can read it on the plane. And I hope you go home with the resolve to say, you know what, this has got to be beyond me. You know, there are 200 people who are registered, over 200 people registered for this meeting today, or over the next day and a half. You might think this is too small, but every great idea, every great movement starts with just a few people. Yeah. And this has got to become a movement. We've got to change what happened here in Texas, what's happening in Georgia, what's happening in Arizona. We've got to make sure that we send a clear message that this is not okay. So it's now time for the Each One Bring One movement on voting rights.
Yeah, and as we...
And pick up the baton.
Yeah, I agree. I really do think that as you look at the playbook, you'll see yourself in the playbook. And what I mean by that, it's everybody can't be on the first leg of this track meet. You know, when you pass it to somebody else. You pass it from yourself to your neighbor. You pass it from your neighbor to your kids, your grandkids, your cousins, whoever. Just pass the baton to the business community. So we're looking at this playbook as a way of passing that baton and continuing to pass that baton. But you know, it also is about being a champion of democracy, about being 18 years old and just being excited about being able to vote and knowing that at that time I felt like I was grown then. Yeah. Nobody could tell me anything. That's still the case.
That's where it started?
I was going to say. I also think that we started this conversation about local leaders. If you have a problem, give it to them and they'll get it done. I do know that there needs to be partnerships. Yeah. The federal partners have to be there. The state partners have to be there. And some of the sessions that you're going to see and hear really do uplift some responsibility to the legal community, to the county clerks and others who are helping to put these systems together. And if we can really focus on what our goal is, and that is education and access, I believe that we can also engage our residents in a way that they really do know that we want everybody to vote. And I think that's what we talked about, that feeling in your mind that we really do want you to vote. So as we go through the next few days, I want to ask all of you to see yourself in a specific role. And sometimes it's not being the leader, it's not being the mayor, it's not being out front. It's being the person that really walks door to door. I mean, I'm a former mayor. I really I miss that, but I really don't miss that. Yeah. But it was something about connecting to someone who had the most power, and they didn't know they had power. that one vote is so much power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need to tell that story about the power that each individual has. And as I listened to Congressman earlier talk about, it should be as easy as getting a glass of water.
Yeah.
That's serious.
Yep.
That is serious. So I want y'all to make sure that everybody in Texas get a glass of water and they are able to get it easily.
Yeah.
No matter what city, county, state it is, it should be just that easy.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you all so much. First of all, let's thank Mayor Hancock here.
Thank you.
And we will hear a little bit later from one of our partners, including the White House, who will talk about the federal role in this voter initiative and gerrymandering and redistricting. We're going to talk about all those things. In closing, Mr. Mayor, you got anything else you want to share with this crowd before we let them kick it off?
Well, let's rock and roll, but I hope you remember the message that Carlotta Walls Lanier left us. Imagine yourself picking up the baton, and while you're here, equip yourself as much as you can with the knowledge, the awareness, the tools to go back to your communities and say, I own this baton and I've got the responsibility to pass it on. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to engaging you over the next day and a half.
Y'all have a great time. Enjoy.
Let's have it.
Thank you for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Justin Levitt, White House Senior Policy Advisor on Democracy and Voting Rights.
I want to thank the gentleman for the conversation we just had. It was, in fact, a wonderful warm-up to be here. I want to thank Mayor Hancock, first of all, for kicking off this conversation last year, and Mayor Turner for continuing this conversation, this nonpartisan conversation on voter rights. You heard from Clarence before, local government is where democracy flourishes. And I could not be more delighted to be in this room in this nonpartisan conversation, driven by mayors, driven by the engines of local government that make it all happen. In this room, you know, whether you're interested in jobs or the environment or public safety or healthcare or education or roads or bridges or water or the electrical grid, the infrastructure that drives all the rest, then you are interested in democracy. It is the infrastructure of infrastructure. It's how we build the world we want to live in together. And it is also the way that we build who we are, how we build us. The power of the ballot is a measure of community, of belonging, of mattering. And it is, as you just heard, a profound power in every ballot. You can see it so very clearly in someone who's been disenfranchised and excluded, or in someone casting their ballot for the first time. There is raw emotion in that moment. For a reason. We don't just leave our choice of public officials up to public opinion polls. And we wouldn't even if the polls were perfect. Because there is a gift in the act of us building us, ballot by ballot by ballot. Or at least that's the idea. 235 years into that idea, we are still fighting to get it right. To get it more right than it was before. Our founding documents commit us to being a work in progress, now and always. In some ways, we are getting it more right, and I don't want to lose the good news. There have been historic firsts In every one of the last few years, including glass ceiling after glass ceiling broken in mayor's offices, for things like gender, or race, or ethnicity, or sexual orientation. And in 2020, in the midst of a raging pandemic, too easy to forget now, a month before any American had their first vaccine shot, more of the eligible electorate voted than at any point in American history since the 19th Amendment doubled the denominator. That's something to applaud. Now, before I came to this role, I was a law professor, and a turnout rate of 66, 67%, a 66 grade or a 67 grade, that leaves a lot of room for improvement, as we like to say. Still, more eligible voices than at any point in history, that's the right trajectory. That's the path that we want to be on. At the White House, we're trying to keep that trajectory. I've got the honor of serving as the Senior Policy Advisor for Democracy and Voting Rights. I sit on a team devoted to racial justice and equity, right there in the title. That is the first of its kind, and it is emphatically the right place for work on democracy to sit. In this work, I carry the sunny confidence that comes from knowing that I am unquestionably the best Senior Policy Advisor for Democracy and Voting Rights to have ever held the job. That's right. And the gnawing neurosis that comes from knowing that I am unquestionably the worst, because as far as I can tell, I'm the only one. The fact that the position exists at all, and that it sits where it sits in a team devoted to racial justice and equity, speaks volumes, I think, about the president's priorities. And the fact that it has to exist is a pretty significant statement about the world in which we find ourselves. Democracy does not happen by accident. And at this moment on the world stage, we need no reminder that democracy is not inevitable. It takes work to keep it. I called democracy a few seconds ago the infrastructure of infrastructure. The president deeply understands the importance of infrastructure. Most people only start to notice infrastructure when something goes wrong, when the grid goes out, when the bridge breaks, when the road has a hole. Well, for the infrastructure of infrastructure, for democracy, people are starting to notice. I'll give you 5 ways. First, I mentioned more Americans voted than ever before in history in 2020. But running an election during the pandemic took resilience, profound resilience. Local officials of both parties and neither made stone soup for most of the year. And thankfully, it was more filling than any of us had anticipated. There was also, to help that along, belated but absolutely critical emergency funding from Congress and from philanthropy. But the fact that philanthropy was necessary reveals some serious problems. We know local jurisdictions are asked to handle more and more with less and less. There's not enough for capital investment, even to replace voting machines so old they've been discontinued by the manufacturer. There's not enough to pay staff what they deserve, and officials are struggling in this environment to retain full-time staff and critical volunteers. This needs work. Second problem people are starting to notice. Some legislators saw the largest electorate ever in history and saw promise. Some saw threat. And those who saw threat have attempted to keep power, not by convincing more voters to vote for him, but by trying to change who votes. Some state legislatures have targeted the ways that officials in 2020 accommodated voters during the pandemic. And it is hard not to think that they've cut back precisely because they don't like the voters who found their way in. Look, elections need rules. That much is clear. And sometimes the rules that keep an election fair end up making it harder for some voters. That's just fact. Should be avoided whenever possible, but that happens. But all of that is profoundly different from a deliberate goal to test the voters' fortitude rather than their qualifications. This needs work. Third thing that people are noticing, the redistricting process. My lord, redistricting. There will always be fights about which lines should go exactly where. But what we are seeing now is an onslaught of abuse. We will talk much more about that in just a second, so I'll leave it for now, but trust me, we will be back. Got a whole panel devoted to that topic, and that too needs work. Fourth is the big lie. It is a direct attack on the very idea of democratic elections. For several years, a few people with outsized megaphones have attempted to profit, relentlessly pressing the fiction that American elections are being stolen. And there is nativism and racism and reflexic, toxic team-based partisanship baked into the geography of that claim and the rhetoric of that claim, fueled by a very dangerous spark of opportunism. That danger has not gone away. Democratic elections are only democratic elections if there is a possibility that you just might lose, and lose fairly. The big lie tries to cancel that possibility. Heads I win, tails you lose. It's an attempt to normalize the notion that elections don't have to matter, and that is dangerous. This needs work. And fifth is broader still, the preconditions for democracy that people are starting to notice everywhere. The census and our national statistical portrait. Enterprises of local journalism that help keep us informed. Civic connection and isolation, trust in government, and the delivery of service that constituents expect. People have to see democracy working for them to believe that it works. This all needs work. It takes a lot of work to keep a republic. We're working on it. We are engaged. I know you are engaged. We need all of us engaged. Part of that engagement is action on substantive democracy legislation, including, federal legislation, not to take over the process, but to set floors and support aspirations that reach higher. We've been very clear from the White House about the legislation we need. But that includes legislation beyond the substantive rules too. The president's budget this year includes the largest commitment of federal funding for elections in history. Because we know that local governments that run our elections, you all and your county colleagues, have struggled to get the resources commensurate with the access and security that voters expect and deserve. So the president proposed something brand new, a reliable, predictable stream of funding, $10 billion over 10 years to election officials, just to get the job done. That's on top of $5 billion for the post office to subsidize election mail, which should also help local budgets. And on top of $250 million for innovation, for policies that help look around the corner. We're asking Congress to prioritize this investment in election infrastructure in a bipartisan way for voters in every precinct, in every county, in every corner of the country, just as it prioritized bridges and tunnels and roads and broadband. We're also putting federal agencies to work. Last year, the president issued an executive order directing an all-of-government effort to promote access to voting information and opportunity. Every agency, do what you can with the authorities you have to make sure people have the information they need and the opportunities they deserve to engage in the process. So, for example, you all know the National Voter Registration Act, the NVRA, Motor Voter. The insight that it brings, that offices like motor vehicle departments can offer a chance to register to vote, to serve the public, while people are already there filling out forms. That same statute lets states designate federal programs too as voter registration agencies, just like the DMV, for the same efficiencies. And in 30 years, it had never been done until now. This year, states have taken the historic step of designating federal programs. The first two ever are two tribal colleges run by the Department of the Interior, which Kansas and New Mexico, bipartisan mix, have now designated as NVRA agencies. Now students at those colleges will have one-stop, easy step to register to vote at the same time they sign up for school. Plain and simple, like drinking a glass of water. And today we are, thank you, yes, we need more water in here. And today, I am delighted to announce that the Department of Veterans Affairs is announcing similar designations. They're on the brink in Kentucky and Michigan, and will have special voter registration distribution status in Pennsylvania. More will follow. We're working on it. And there is so much more. The Department of Health and Human Services issued guidance to community health centers serving about 29 million underserved patients, clarifying how those health centers can support registration and access to information. Housing and Urban Development did something similar for more than 3,000 public housing authorities. Same with labor and its 2,400 American job centers. As volunteer income tax assistance centers helped low-income taxpayers this tax season, over 450 centers in 40 different states also offered information about the electoral process to the same clients they were assisting. The federal government's Human Resources Agency expanded paid time off to vote for federal employees and to serve as a nonpartisan poll worker, helping you all recruit people to actually fill in bodies at the polls to help make the machinery work. We're expanding information on the election process through vote.gov website and dramatically expanding the languages in which that information is available, including, as of today, the first Native American language available nationwide for Yupik, Alaska Natives, translating information wherever they may live, Alaska or otherwise. And on and on and on and on. We have so much more to do. And we help where we can. Where we can't, try to stay out of the way. But we are also, thank you, we are also smart enough to appreciate the work that happens here, in this room, and in the extension of this room beyond, where officials join with advocates, join with the public, join with local and state and federal counterparts to help deliver an ever more perfect union. Assessing and analyzing the shortfalls and then putting shoulders back to grindstones to make it better still. As Ben Franklin recognized, we have a republic, but it's on us to keep it. On all of us. On all of us to keep making it better. I know we have an ambitious few days ahead of us. Thank you, Mayor Turner, for setting that agenda. So, all of us, let's get back to work. Now, one of the ways to get back to work is discussing one of the topics, one of the infrastructure failures I jumped on before, and that's redistricting. I want to invite colleagues to the stage so that you can hear them talk to you in firsthand, because I can't. Redistricting should be a way of connecting communities to representatives. But in much of the country, it's become a way for representatives to cling to power by picking and choosing the constituents they prefer, with, unfortunately, some discrimination along the way. based on partisanship or race or both. The courts have made it much harder to address that discrimination when it happens before the next election takes place. We know elections have consequences. Discriminatory elections have consequences too. And all of this is something that I don't have much say in my current role. We heard about the importance of role, and I know this is a zone where I stay out, because redistricting is mostly a state and local enterprise. And to the extent there's a federal role, it's in enforcing federal law, which is a vitally important subject I have absolutely no part in right now. In the past, I've had the privilege of serving in the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, working on enforcing cases. And at that point, to protect the rule of law, there were strictly enforced firewalls between the Justice Department and the White House on any case matters. Those firewalls are back. And so I leave it to my colleagues at the Department of Justice to do the law enforcement. I find out when they file cases just when you do, when the press release goes up online or when CNN reports on it. And so I'm delighted to say that work continues, but that I have absolutely no role in it. I've studied redistricting, I've enforced redistricting laws. That's all in the past, which means I need to turn to my colleagues to tell you about how this work progresses now. And I have with me a magnificent panel of experts from my left to further on my left by position, not politically. I have Michael Lee from the Brennan Center for Justice. Thank you. I have Amber McReynolds. You heard part of her resume from Mayor Hancock already, a former Denver elections clerk, former executive director of the National Vote at Home Institute, now a governor of the U.S. Postal Service Board of Elections, the Board of Governors. Does so much elections work, I get the mail and the elections confused. And Mark Gruskin, who's a shareholder at Recht Kornfeld and an election law expert for decades and a litigator in his prime. So I'm going to join them in the chairs. Please join me in thanking them for being here. Hello.
Hello.
It's very nice to see you all. So this is a very real pleasure to join a panel of very old friends, of longtime friends, not old friends. I want to start by talking about the landscape of the redistricting problem we're in. The fact that this is something that people are noticing going wrong in the infrastructure of democracy. We are about to enter a Supreme Court term. Most of the maps for this cycle have been drawn, but that does not mean the cycle is over, because the litigation will last throughout the decade. So I'm going to turn to my friend Michael to help us lay the landscape for where we stand with redistricting now, what the legal challenges are coming up, how we are able or unable to fight against discrimination in the process based on what the courts have told us we can do.
So the redistricting cycle, as Justin says, is over, but it's not likely to be really over. It's like we're in a pause, and there's going to be a lot more fights, both in the courts, but also I think there's an increased risk that many states will choose to redraw maps, what we call mid-decade. You know, generally states only draw maps once. Some states may be tempted to do it again in order to try to lock down some advantages, and I think that that's a real risk. You know, I think in some ways, you know, when you look at the redistricting cycle, people often say, like, was it good or was it bad? And I think it depends on what lens you use. If you look at it from the lens of, is, for example, the House in play, surprisingly, the answer is yes, because for a number of reasons, but mainly because Republicans chose to create more safe seats rather than try to create more seats. So, you know, I think they were a little scared about some of the demographic changes that happened last decade, particularly in states like Texas. And so they opted for safer seats, and that has meant that the House is actually in play, maybe even in 2022, but certainly down the road. So that's one lens, but then if you look at it from the standpoint of competition, really competition is being squeezed out of maps around the country. There are fewer competitive districts than ever. And and that's both at the congressional level, but also at the legislative level. I think there are only maybe 4 legislative chambers that reasonably are in play this year. And that's remarkable because you have a lot of very swingy states. Another level, of course, is if you look at states, right? I mean, I talked about the national landscape being, and a lot of people are saying like, oh, well, it turned out okay, right? There isn't really a problem. But if you zero down at the state level or at the local level, there really is. Like in Texas is a prime example. There were in Texas before 11 congressional districts that Donald Trump won by 15 or more points. Now there are 21. And Republicans only have 24 seats in Texas, so 21 out of the 24 seats are super Trump districts. And that's because of ruthless carving up of communities, both cities, but also this time the suburbs. The Denton County just north of Dallas used to anchor a district. Now parts of it are drawn into a district that stretches all the way to the Texas Panhandles, hundreds of miles away. New York Times did a great piece where they looked at oh, here's Denton, it's like a cool college town, right? And it's got like high-tech industries. And then it went out to the Panhandle where they're like tumbleweeds, right? And that's one district now. And you see that similarly in Fort Bend, just a little west of here, you see like Asian communities ruthlessly carved out of a district that was very competitive. Because people decided that they didn't want to compete for the votes of people of color. They were going to just gerrymander their way out of that. They were backfilled with rural white voters. And so that gets me to the last point I'll make is like really from the standpoint of people of color, this cycle was a disaster. Other than in California, you really didn't see creation of many additional opportunities for communities of color. California, the commission did a very good job, Colorado also, but in particular, California, which grew people of color, Asians and Latinos powered the growth, and that just is not reflected. That was reflected in California that isn't reflected elsewhere. And I think there's I'll just briefly flag some of the legal issues. I mean, there is a case that's going to be argued on October 4th about what the Voting Rights Act means, and I think and at the end of the month, the Supreme Court is going to hear the affirmative action cases out of Harvard and the University of North Carolina. I think if last term was about abortion, this term is going to be about race, and I think that there's a real risk that the Supreme Court is about to do damage because I think the Supreme Court thinks that we are in a more post-racial world than most of us would probably say that we are. And I think that that's really a scary place to be, right? The court may make it really hard to consider race when drawing maps, and that will have an impact both for the Voting Rights Act, but potentially also for state law things like community of interest requirements. Community of interest requirements in many states or in local governments say like a community of interest can be a racial or ethnic community and things like that, and there already are challenges percolating where people say like, no, that's unconstitutional. We are supposed to be race blind, and that's the world. And I don't think that, I think most of us think that those are real communities that are really important to protect. The Supreme Court may not agree.
A sobering assessment, certainly. And in addition to the substantive threats on the horizon from the court, I'll note that this past few years, actually, the court has trimmed back even on the relief you can get when you've proven discrimination. So you come to court, the window is narrowing to be able to prove that there's been a discriminatory line drawn, and recently the courts have said, even if you've proved that lines were drawn in order to discriminate against you and your community members on the basis of race or ethnicity, you may have to wait an election or two before you can get relief. That is, you just got to sit there and let the discriminatory elections happen before we're going to bring the courts into the process. In that context, some states are trying to get ahead of the courts, not by fighting back against discriminatory laws after they've been passed, but by changing the structure up front to try and take away some of the incentive for incumbent politicians to decide that they didn't want to compete for X votes or Y votes and to gerrymander people out of particular districts. And Amber, I know, was a commissioner on Colorado's example of this. Amber, talk a little bit about that experience, about serving on Colorado's commission, about what brought you to that work, about how you saw it work differently from the redistricting process when legislators have been in charge.
So first, my experience with redistricting goes back a long way. So I also, as a former election official, was responsible for the aftermath of redistricting and doing re-precincting. So that goes back all the way to 2010 and that census cycle. So I, was receiving the information and then putting back out to the public what the new precinct lines were going to be and communicating that. And in that work, a number of technical details, for me at least, stood out as being problematic. And so I think there's a number of things, policy-wise, but also technical and mechanical issues with the data, with the census blocks, with sort of what I would call a more reactive stance that we find ourselves in, as opposed to being proactive with improving policies or getting in front of some of these things. I feel like this cycle in particular, because of the pandemic, we have been far more reactive to the process of redistricting, as well as identifying and correcting some of the challenges. So I think there's a number of issues we can improve upon. Colorado, for the first time, did an independent commission. We had one for congressional, one for legislative. I got involved because I actually helped work to pass this initiative. It was a voter-approved initiative, had a huge margin of victory. My good friend Mark helped draft the language for it, but I worked on that campaign because I felt it was really important for us to establish an independent commission similar to California, similar to what Michigan also passed in the same year we did. Because I thought the process should be more transparent, should be more available to the public to engage. And so then when it came time to select commissioners, I had a number of people sort of reach out and say, you helped pass this initiative, so now you need to go and apply to be on the commission and help with that process. So I sort of decided to do that, kind of forgot that I had submitted the application. Then I got appointed to the Postal Service Board of Governors and had to go through Senate confirmation and that long process, and then found out, I don't know, in the middle of that I was going to be on the commission, which was a whole nother time commitment for hours. So anyways, 2021 was an interesting year for me. But we hosted, I think, about 60 hearings statewide, traveled all across the state as a commission. We did both of our hearings sometimes together. It was the most transparent process that ever happened. And what I was struck by more than anything is, regardless of the political affiliation of voters in the state of Colorado, people deeply care about who represents them. And the amount of people that testified at these hearings, they'd go into the midnight hours in some cities and on some of our Zooms. And we never cut anyone off. And what I was really struck by was how people deeply cared, and the number of people that said, this is the first time I've provided testimony in front of anyone, legislative or any body, and I'm so deeply grateful that I had the chance. And the number of mothers that had just laid down their kids to sleep at night and were coming on Zoom at 10:30 at night and saying, this matters to me, and I haven't felt representative for this different piece. And we heard issues about water, and we heard issues about transportation and communities of interest. And so I think what stood out to me is the real benefit and power of independent commissions is the transparency that they can provide to connect the public, enable this process for there to be fair representation, because we as voters should be choosing politicians. Politicians should not be choosing their own voters. So this process, I think, one of the biggest advantages is the transparency it provides to the public to engage. And that is very powerful, because that can also go on and bleed into other aspects, including the voting process itself. So I certainly want to see it replicated elsewhere, but I think there's a ton of lessons learned to make sure the process is fair for everyone, and we can continue to iterate and improve on these processes.
Thanks, Amber. I'm actually going to ask your colleague Mark about some of those lessons learned. As you mentioned, Mark had a hand in drafting the initiative that became Colorado's independent commissions. And Mark, from idea, conception to actual practice, how'd the translation go? What did you see that you expected? What did you see that you didn't expect? How did it look? How did it work from your perspective?
Well, the movement for a commission process usually joins two forces. One is a force much like Amber gave voice to, people who really care about a transparent, open, clear, and participatory process. And the other force is the party out of power, because they are interested in having more competitive districts, because whatever they're doing in the political process isn't selling within their state. And so you have this very interesting conglomeration of interests. You have people who really care about the process and people who are looking to game the process. They use the same line in order to get the commission established. And it is full of promise. And I am delighted to hear that from the commissioner point of view, it felt like it was authentic. And I know that there were many people who testified, because there were thousands that did, who really did opt in as a matter of public interest or personal concern. But even though I know this is being taped and I know these words are going to come back to haunt me, there were political operatives behind virtually everything that happened at these commission levels. And a lot of this testimony was set up. And that's okay, because that happens in every legislative process. But what we came to understand in the fulfillment of the commission was that you were taking, if there had been 12 Amber McReynolds on the Congressional Commission and on the Legislative Commission, the process would have worked in a most admirable way. But you had, as you do in every policymaking process, people who had partisan agendas, you had people who had personal quirks, and so it didn't exactly work optimally. But I would say this for people who are thinking about commissions. Number one of the things we did, because of fears about where the United States Supreme Court was going, was to write in Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act into the Colorado Constitution. So to preserve the protection that, honestly, I anticipated and fear will be undercut by the United States Supreme Court, we also wrote in an additional protection, a non-dilution of minority influence protection that we thought would give rise to the other type of key minority-related districts that have been recognized. There are majority-minority districts, but there are also crossover districts where there is coalition building, and there are influence districts. We should have been more explicit, because the Colorado Supreme Court didn't think our language was just enough. And I guess I would caution anyone who's thinking about the commission process to go to that extra level, because we're at a point now where we are so polarized that without crossover coalition districts that build people's policy bridges, this redistricting process ends up falling short. Even though it's done independently and it's done transparently, it ends up falling short because it leaves us in pockets of voters that have self-selected. And long term, I think the issues that we all have and concerns we all have about the process and that you all see every day are only addressed by that kind of coalition building.
So Mark's offering a little bit of advice to those who are seeking to set up commissions of their own. These sorts of independent commissions aren't just at the statewide level. We know that several counties and several cities have followed suit with reforms of their own. Amber, I want to ask you, either in setting up structures of their own for local districts or in fighting for state or congressional districts that make more sense for them, what can cities do? How should cities engage with this process to make sure the districts are fair?
Yeah, so there's a number of things, and you know, some of this comes from my experience in 2010 when we received the districts from the state, and this was through the old process. When we went to re-precinct, we identified a number of issues with the census block. And part of the reason for that is the census gets their information from cities and counties, so they get either the assessor's data or there's a process usually for the cities to start providing block lines and information about streets and zoning and all that to the census. And what we found was there's tremendous flaws in that, but also a lot of cities don't have sophisticated GIS systems, counties don't have sophisticated GIS systems. So just the mechanics and the technical details, if they are sent to the census and they are incorrect, and then the census uses that to go draw census blocks that then are also incorrect, and then the redistricting process happens using, again, this sort of compilation of bad data, then we end up after the fact trying to fix it. And so I think there's a number of issues that we can do. I've thought about even a smart cities type challenge, but I think there's a number of things that mayors, cities, counties, and organization structures can start doing today to work through some of those technical details that affect this process. Further, and as mentioned, I'm one of the governors for the Postal Service. The Postal Service has the largest GIS data system and technology department in the world. And the reason for that is we have to deliver 425 million pieces of mail and 25 million packages to 170 million doors on a daily basis. So what does that mean? Well, we have carriers, we have all these people out in every community every day identifying changes that maybe don't match the data. So the Postal Service has never been leveraged in this process as a partner, and I do think there's a huge opportunity there. And then I think just on the operations of the commission, there's certainly ways to improve this. As someone who's a process improvement person, it was sort of hard to be part of a, you know, very bureaucratic commission that could operate a little bit better. And you know, I think again, these are all improvements we can continue to make over time.
Thank you so much, Amber. I know that we are moving on to the rest of a really robust conversation today, and so please join me in thanking the rest of the panelists, Mark, Amber, Michael. So appreciate your expertise.
Please welcome back to the stage Mr. Clarence Anthony, Executive Director of the National League of Cities.
Man, with that music, I'm about to preach. And they said, I can't even remember what they said, though. That's the problem. No, thank you all very much. What a great panel and a lot of information that's been provided. You know, a little bit later, somewhere in this day or tomorrow, I want to ask a few of you what inspired you to register to vote. When did you register to vote? What happened in your community? So y'all get ready, because I cannot stand just being in a convening that I don't get some feedback from those that are here. Now, this is our opportunity where we're going to encourage you all to get involved in the session because you've heard a lot of framing of why we're here. What are some of the federal issues that are being looked at? How do you approach some of the legal things that are created as barriers? But the important thing as we go through this program is being able to understand what, again, when we leave here, how do we use these tools? So, we're going to take a 15-minute break. Is that correct? All right. take a 15-minute break, and you're going to be going to sessions, breakout sessions. The first session is the legal strategy for voter access. That breakout will meet in Grand Ballroom I on the 4th floor. All right? All of you people who like legal stuff like that, y'all, that's where y'all go. All right? We good? We got a lot of lawyers in here. The next breakout group is focused on community responsibility and voter registration. And that group will meet in Grand Ballroom L on the 4th floor. And leveraging intergovernmental relationships for fair elections breakout group will convene in room 335 A through C on the 3rd floor. So please find the issue that you're interested in and make sure that you go into that group. These conversations are for your benefit, for our benefit, to continue what we're doing to improve our toolkit that we're going to continue to share. And they're just not for us and the panelists. They're for all of us who showed up here who are participating. Right afterwards, at 11:30, we'll host a press conference featuring our co-hosting mayors and speakers from the League of Women Voters of Texas and all of the elected officials that are here. We'd ask that you attend this press conference at 11:30 in room 340 AB. Of course, you can find all of this information and this session information by flipping over your name tag, and there's a QR code on your name tag that would give you more information. Now, the second plenary session occurs at 12:15 p.m. So we got some work to do this morning. I do feel like I'm giving the church announcements. All the sisters with the nice hats, y'all show up in room 812 or something like that. I do, I really do. Okay, 12:15, we're gonna come back here and convene. So I want us to go out. I always feel like when I'm at a convening, I get out of it what I put in it. If I sit back and just roll my eyes and say, I've heard that before, oh my God, he going on and on and on. I'm talking to the elected officials. They long-winded, you just roll your eyes. I'm really saying that put something into these breakout sessions, and I promise to you that you will get something out. So let's go to our breakout sessions and get to work. Thank you all. See y'all soon.